Hey guys, Richard Holden here. We are live. It's after 7. We're starting a little bit late. It's 7:30 actually, or thereabouts. Yeah, 7:29. So right on the half hour. We got a little bit of late start. Had a bunch of stuff I had to get done. But if you guys haven't taken a look yet, make sure go take a look at the video I just posted today on the 4.6 liter 2-valve intake manifolds. We ran the truck intake manifold, the PI intake manifold, and then we also ran the Ford Racing Bullet intake manifold. I'm going to go ahead and put... see, Ford 4.6 liter 2-valve intake test. Yeah, we're here. Everyone's showing up. So we were talking about the 4.6 liter 2-valve intake test. I hope you guys have all watched it. And I wanted to get your guys' comments and find out what you thought about the thing that I thought was the coolest thing. And I mentioned this in the video, is that I love the variable plenum volume on the truck manifold. I thought that was like an awesome touch for the engineers to come up with a little trick down there and have it only affect the power output, you know, in one little area and have it not affect other areas up in the curve. So it was really cool that we could see we can get an enhanced like torque production with that change in plenum volume, because I've done lots and lots of plenum volume tests. And honestly, I haven't seen big changes in power. And if we do, like this one, and I've run one other test where we also saw this, more of a gain down low than anything that we saw up top. And then I went extreme, obviously, on the Keglodon thing on the LS motor, where we did a giant plenum volume change, and it really didn't do anything. I thought that there would be some kind of change, it good, bad, or indifferent. It didn't matter. Yo, the Oz man. I thought it would do something, and it just when it does nothing, it's almost even worse. Like, I don't mind sometimes when we make changes and it just loses a bunch of power. You're like, oh, okay, yeah, that's the wrong direction. Which I saw a lot of those things when I was doing the Engine Masters thing. We would find when I was doing Engine Masters way back when, we would find a lot of stuff that either didn't work, or that lost power, and a lot of times we'd find stuff that stayed the same. So it'd lose power somewhere and gain power somewhere else. But then the average number that we were looking for would actually stay the same. So we're like, oh, great. It's just a trade-off and it didn't gain us anything, but it was good information. And we'd put that down later for something that we might want to try. So it was kind of cool. I wanted to let you guys know coming up in part 2 of this intake test, we've got some cool stuff. We've got the Riker Racing manifold, which was big back in the day, short runner deal with a big throttle body on it. We tested the P51 intake manifold, which was a cast aluminum piece. We also tested the trick flow manifold. I also did one of the Super Richie dual plenum deals. And we ran a bunch of testing when we had that motor on there. And that one was actually done on a 5-liter stroker. And I bring that up because in case anybody's interested, I showed the picture of here. And I'll see if you guys can see that. See if we can bring that in focus there. This is a short block. And let's see if I can... And I'm showing you this because this is a short block I had for a long time and I haven't done anything with it, so I'm selling it. So if anybody's interested in a 4.6 2-valve iron short block, let me know. It's $1,800 is the price. You can send me something. I'll go ahead and put my Killer B16 email address here. Killer B16. But first, let me tell you about it. I'm selling it, and the reason that I haven't used it for a lot of stuff is because it has a flat top piston in it. It has a Cobra crank, it has forged rods, and these are forged pistons. But with flat top pistons on a 2-valve motor, the compression is going to be very high. It's going to be over 11-to-1. So it really is kind of best for an all motor kind of deal. So if somebody's looking for something like that, $1,800 is a cheap deal for all of that stuff. It's all assembled and ready. It has, I think it has the oil pump in it, has the pickup and stuff. So it's kind of ready to go as far as a short block. So if you guys are interested in that, let me know. Send me an email. The other thing I was thinking, I wanted to get input from you guys on if somebody was interested in this. The other thing I'm thinking about doing is changing the piston. So I'll take it apart, change the piston to a dish piston to bring the compression down to a more reasonable amount that more guys would probably, because I think probably more guys with a 2-valve would be interested in running nitrous and or boost on their combinations, because that's kind of what they need, then they would be running a real high compression 4.6. If you were going to do a high compression NA motor, you probably would do a 5-liter stroker, and that's kind of what I would do, and that's what we did in the past. So that's something else that I might do, just spend the money on pistons and balancing, and then put it back together, and then I would sell it, because I don't think we're going to be using a 2-valve stuff for the foreseeable future. I have way too many that are stacked up before that. So let us see. So that's happening. And then my other question is, what do you guys, and so we've talked about what the last video was, what the upcoming video is. And then do you guys want to see, I've done lots and lots of testing on 5-liter Fords, the original, probably not the original one since we had Boss 302s and stuff back in the day, but the 5-liter fuel injected motor starting in 87 with the 225 horse version. I've done a lot of intake testing on those. So we've run the factory ones and Cobras and GT40s and boxes and all kinds of stuff. So yeah, I wondered if you guys were interested in seeing more testing on that, maybe doing more of the, because there have been more intake manifolds that people have introduced since I did that testing way back when. And really, when I did the testing way back, I was more interested in doing, showing people, because the big confusion was, oh yeah, but with boost, it doesn't matter. You know, with a turbo, or most of the guys back then were with a blower, you know, centrifugal blower, it doesn't matter. You know, the boost just, that's why everybody put the Downs boxes and the CarTech boxes and the Hartmans and in comp. Everybody had these boxes that got rid of all the runner length. The problem with this is they got rid of all the runner length and it hurt power through most of the range, because shorter runners do that, as we saw in this last test on the 2-valve. And as we'll see even more in part 2, shortening the runner length does change the power curve. We see that on all the LS stuff. We see it on every motor, because that's what happens. Intake manifolds are RPM specific. That's where they're efficient in a given RPM range, dictated by a few things, but primarily by the runner length. So, but I want to know if you guys want to see more 5-liter Ford intake testing, and I could just do a bunch of it all at once and do it on a mildly modified motor. So that's possible. So let's get to some questions here, and we'll see how you guys are doing, see what's going on. Let me go back here a little bit. First of all, hey to everybody. I like when everybody stops by. Boosted Thunderjet, hi from the big state. Is that Alaska? Michael wants to know if I think 305s are worth modding. I take a look at all the 305 testing I have up there. I do that not because a lot of people take the approach that, oh, a 305 is better than a 350 or a 350 is better than a 305. I take the approach is that there's lots of guys that have 305s, so I'm going to show them what happens when they modify it. Same thing with the 350, same thing with the 400. I haven't done a 307 yet, but I really would like to, because again, that's like the 305. Everybody says, oh, you can't make power with a 307. You can make power with any motor. If you modify it, if you put heads, cam, and intake on it, you can do good things to it. And that's why I do that stuff. So yes, I like the 305, and I like doing things with those motors like the other guys' motors, because they're not normal. It's easy to get power out of a lot of the other stuff, but out of the 305, it gets a little more difficult. Mike Gore wants to know if I got locked in the closet. I don't know. Is it one of these closets over here? Yes, Tim. Flat tops would not be good for piston to valve clearance either. Mike wants to know what kind of boosted Dorman intakes can take. Are you talking about a Dorman 2-valve intake or a Dorman LS intake manifold? And I haven't run them to all of it yet to find out. Fred wants to know, I've heard that 32-valve B heads are better for boost than C heads. I don't know how anybody, even Mahovitz, who's a fantastic guy and has forgotten more about 4.6 performance than I'll ever know. I don't think he would even tell you that he's done a back-to-back test on those two things to find out exactly whether the B head is better than the C head. He ran for a long, long time, ran the B heads. And that may have changed relatively recently with the introduction of the GT500 and the Ford GT and other stuff. I don't know that that's true. But the other thing that I like to tell people is that when they make statements like that, okay, let's say that it is. Let's say that if you were trying to make 3,000 horsepower, that it'd be easier to do ultimately with the B head than the C head. Does that make any difference at 1,000 horsepower? It really doesn't, because we already know that you can make that kind of power very easily with any of those heads, even a 2-valve head. Frank wants to know, what about the Triton V10? That is on the list. I'm definitely going to do that. I haven't decided whether it's a 3-valve or a 2-valve, but again, there's so many others that are stacked up before that I have to get done. But the Triton V10 is definitely one of them. Yes, Mike, I'm familiar with it, that EFI started in 86, but that's a 200 horse version. That's why I specified it was a 225 horse version in 87. And then 88, first year of the mass air meter in California only. And I know that because I have one of those. Let's see. Positive displacement blowers are inherently not good at high pressure differentials. When you start to make high boosts with a root style blower, they regurgitate back up through the rotors. Roots blowers are not good for high pressure. That's certainly true. They're not good for high RPM either. Yes, Jason, the 430 Mel motor. I don't see a lot of those. I think I've seen a couple of them at Westech. I know at least one of them was on the chassis dyno. And it was kind of cool because I couldn't identify the motor and it was a Ford. So I thought, oh, well, I know everything about Fords. And then I saw the motor and I'm like, that doesn't really look that familiar. I don't know that I've seen that before. And it turned out to be a Mel motor. Let's see. I don't know who Gopher Broke Off-Road is talking to about a 2.3. I don't know. I don't remember anybody mentioning that. Jason said, you have said that if the turbo is the limiting factor, it does not matter what cam. Could you do a comparison of cams from mild to wild on a max turbo? What is it you're trying to see? Why don't we just take two then? Why don't we just pick a mild one and then we'll run that to 1,000 horsepower, and then we can pick a wilder one and run that to 1,000 horsepower, and everything in between there will do the same thing. That'd be much easier than running 12 or 15 cams, which is why I haven't gone back down to do the sloppy stage 2 versus the world under boost, because I don't look forward to changing a bunch of cams. I know we're going to do exactly the same thing. Gopher Broke. Edelbrock is closing. That's sad. They're not closing. They're just moving. Richard, do you want to pilot a triple turbo diesel super stock in a tractor pull? I'd have to look up to see what super stock is, but it sounds like it's a lot of fun. Edelbrock is not closing. I know everybody likes to jump up and down and say, oh my God, this is the end of an era. They're moving from California because Edelbrock and Comp have merged, depending on who you talk to, who bought who or whatever, but they're all one company now. So they're moving back so that they're all centralized. Mitch Connor, have you ever thought about doing some runs with a 3.900 stroke? Is that on an LS that you're talking about? I don't know why you would, unless you're trying to not have the piston come that far out of the hole, I guess. But the stroke length difference, like if you did a 3.75 stroke or a 3.622 stroke, think about it this way: you're reducing displacement, and what happens when we reduce displacement? You reduce power, because the smaller motor makes less power than the bigger motor. So there's no, I can tell you this, if this is what you're getting at, there's no secret stroke. A 3.9 isn't inherently better than a 4-inch stroke. If you did it on most average like stroker combinations, it just makes less power because it has less displacement. It doesn't overcome inefficiencies or rod angle or ring flutter or those kinds of things that a lot of people think. When we've tested them, the bigger motor makes more power. Fords are for me. Wants to know, how would you configure a 302 to rev out to 7,000 RPM and make 350 to 400 crank horsepower? Well, if you don't need to run it to 7,000 to make 400 horsepower. You only need to rev it to about 63 or 6,400 to make 7,000. That's really easy. You do that with a hydraulic roller cam and a dual plane intake, and you could get to 400 with what we did was we ran a dual plane air gap intake manifold, a TFS 11R head. If you had it at 10-1, it would help. The Comp Extreme Energy 274 cam, roller rockers, inch and 3/4 long tube headers, and we either had a 650 or a 750 carburetor on there, and that made over 400. It made 410 or 411, I think, but it didn't run to 7,000. We could, but that's already on the downside of the curve. If you put a single plane intake manifold on it and more camshaft, then it will easily go to 7,000. Stephen King wants to know what would happen if you rifled the intake ports on the intake manifold and heads to the valves to increase airflow velocity. I'm not sure that it would do that. Tim wants to know, the next time you build an intake manifold, I would like to see an intake test that is 180-degree 2 plenum versus 1 plenum per bank. You're gonna have to draw me a picture of what you're trying to do there. Are you talking about a cross ram? Julius, why do you why do you keep sending money? I mean, it's awesome and we love it. West Virginia's in the house. Mike, you're always welcome to ask questions. Always, always, always. That's why I'm here. I'm trying to help. I can tell you what I know. You guys tell me what you know, and then that's how we all learn, man. That's how we all get together. John's in the house. John Woodworth. Richard, there's such a huge supply of old North Star V8s. I must have saw, I don't know. I'm sure I saw 7 or 8 of them the last time I was at the wrecking yard. So there are a lot of them. We're still going, and here maybe you guys can answer this. Here's a problem we have right now with the 3800 Series 2 motor. The way that I'm going to solve it is I'm going to machine a spacer that goes out in front of the dampener and just mount a conventional trigger wheel like we use on a small block or a big block. Right now, the trigger pattern is 18-1, I think. And it also has a cam, I think a 3-pulse cam sync in there also. And the Holley will not recognize that crank trigger. And we cannot cut and slice teeth off of that to get to a trigger pattern that Holley will recognize. So I'd have to redo something to make a new one, unless anybody else out there knows of somebody that's run the 3800 on some other kind of aftermarket ECU, like a Mega Squirt, and I think Eric said the AEM might do it. If you guys have had any experience with that, you 3800 Series 2 guys, the L67 motor, let me know if there's an easier way rather than me having to build this, which I'll do when I go down. We'll just put a regular crank trigger on it that we use on everything else. I just need to build the spacer and then get a long enough bolt to secure that to the dampener, because we don't want to weld to the dampener, and we don't want to secure it to the dampener because it would be secured to the rubber section. There's a lot of vibration there, and the signal kind of goes away when there's a lot of vibration. The Nova build is still happening. I'm going to take it down to Westech so that we can put a motor in it. Joyce wants to know if a 5.4 heads fit a 4.6 block. Yes, they do. The heads are the same. Joshua said, you inspired me to try my first engine mod. That's awesome. With my 97 Mustang, so it is a non-PI. I'm going to try a PI head swap and intake. You can swap all of that stuff on there. You can swap the stock cams, heads, intake on there. That will be good. Or if you put aftermarket cams in there, it will be even better. Something like the 262 cam would work really good for a street driver. I had the 274 cams, the 274H non-PI cam, so the lower lift version in my Mustang, and I didn't really like them driving around. It was kind of soft down low, and idled not that great. So I think that the trade-off was too big with that. So the 262s are ones that I would recommend. Milton Max, have you tried a 274 cam with Vortech heads? No, not on a small block Chevy. Not that I remember. I think we've run the 268 stuff with a Vortech head. I take that back. We ran, I can't remember. I have to look it up. It was some kind of low lift. So I'm not sure if it was extreme energy or not. So a better question will 4VC heads? I hope you're not talking about 4V Cleveland heads, but I think it's a 4VC 4.6 2 valve or a 4 valve head from a Boss 260 fitted Texid 4.6 block. Yeah, that should bolt on without any problem. Frank wants to know if I've ever thought about doing Volkswagen VR6 engines. I've never done one of those. I don't think I've modified one of those at all. I don't even think I've run one on the engine dyno or on the chassis dyno. I've done some of their 1.8 and 2 liter turbo motors, and even some of the older non-turbo stuff that we made a Vortech kit and put it on there, and that worked out pretty well. But I have not done the VR6. I think it's really cool. I think it's neat, the narrow angle stuff. The quintessential question, have I missed it? But what are your thoughts on low compression, high boost versus high compression, high boost? Obviously, the ideal thing is high compression and high boost with lots of octane. So if octane is your ceiling, I think low compression and more boost is probably the way to go. Rusty wants to talk 5.4 intake manifolds. If you take a look at the videos I have up, I did a whole video on a number of different 5.4 4-valve intake manifolds that we ran. So if you're talking about 4-valve, that video is already up and you can go check it out. There's lots of them. We even did adapters on the 5.4 that allowed us to run a bunch of 302 intake manifolds. Mind block, is it worth getting an Edelbrock aluminum 4.6 intake manifold or stay? I would stay with the stock PI. It's cheap, it's plastic, you have it. And then I don't know that I would run the 274 cams. Those are pretty big. Racer D said you need more compression to make power at higher RPM. I don't agree with that. The compression is not what makes power at higher RPM. Compression raises power everywhere, from the bottom all the way to the top. It's like boost. It just elevates everything. Where you make power is a function of three things: the cylinder head flow, the cam timing, and then the intake manifold, primarily the runner length. And those will dictate, and obviously you have to have the valve train to make that work, but those will dictate where you make power. And they'll do that at 8-to-1, and they'll also do that at 12 or 13-to-1. Jay Keatley, sounds crazy, but have you tried hydraulic roller cam with mechanical roll lifters? Yeah, the Brulee's done that a few times on big block stuff. I haven't done that with an LS because I don't see any reason to. If you can run 8,500 RPM with a hydraulic roller, I don't see any reason to try to mix and match hydraulic and mechanical stuff. But on big blocks, that's quite common. Okay, Jay wants to know what size single turbo for a stock 96, 98 4-valve to make 600 horsepower. Yeah, a 76, 75 or 78, 75. Actually, it doesn't even that big. A 366. The GT45 will certainly do that. There's lots of turbos that will do 600 horsepower. Thanks, Julius. Let me scroll down here. Oh man, I'm like way behind here. I'd be. Let's see. Michael wants to know if I've ever run a Gen 1 283 small block. Yeah, the guys at West Tech have a couple of them. He's redoing one right now. As a matter of fact, he's doing a fuel injected, a 283 horse 283. So I'm going to cover that for a video too when they get it all done and running. He's rebuilding the fuel injection unit and stuff. It's an original matching numbers thing. It's kind of cool. Luke Logan says an air gap does nothing, but port matching does. I haven't seen power from port matching. No one has been able to show me that. And I've had several people try and do port matched intake manifolds and stuff. And on the dyno, we saw no power. And I'm not saying that it doesn't do that. And I can also tell you that we've run rectangular port intake manifolds on oval port and even peanut port heads. And not saw dramatic losses in power from doing that. So as a matter of fact, the Mercury Marine stuff did that right from the factory. They had rec port intake manifolds on oval port heads, and they did that on blower stuff as well. So I'm not saying that's a good idea, and there's a gross mismatch on some of that stuff. But when you're talking about, a lot of people want to like gasket match it. Like the gasket manufacturer knows what the optimum size of the port should be. That's not true, obviously. So I'd like to see somebody do a ported or a port matched intake manifold to the head and show me that it made power. I think Forge for me wants to know what aftermarket management system that I've run. We've run Holley stuff and Megasquirt stuff. And I think a couple of guys have stuff that plugs right into the factory harness, which is nice. It makes life a lot easier. Inferno wants to know any timeline for testing a Toyota V8. I don't have one right now, so the timeline's sometime in the future. Any timeline on the 300 forward, again, that's in the future too. I have to get done the stuff that I have to get done first. I've got to do the Buick. I have to do the 262. I have to finish that. I have to finish the L99. Now everything is on the way, which I was hoping to do the 3800 while I was down there, or at least some testing on it. I probably will do L99 stuff depending on whether we can get that 3800 up and running. As I said, just getting them running seems to be the problem, which is why it's difficult for me to do these newer motors, because if I can't get them running, then I can't do the tests, and then that's just like a bunch of wasted time. So I have to run stuff that we know that we can run. It will start and work, and I'll be able to tune it, because then we can make all of the time and changes. I can put the turbo on it, put a blower on it, put nitrous on it, do all that stuff. We're also working behind the scenes on the 4200, the Atlas motor. So that's happening also. Turbo Boy 4548 wondering about the 195 TFS 4.6 heads. Those heads work really well. They're much better than the factory heads, but you have to have the rest of, like with anything, you have to have the rest of the motor to go along with that to get the maximum gains out of it. Jay wants to know if 96 and 98 4V rod pistons will hold up to 600 horsepower. We've made a lot more than that on factory rod stuff. We've run Kenny Bells on them and all kinds of stuff on the early motors and nitrous and all kinds of stuff. So yeah, you're plenty safe there. Just put ring gap in the pistons. James is checking in from Charles County. Mad Mod wants to know if I've done much testing on a Victor Jr. I have not. See, that's one of the manifolds that I have not tested. I've never run a Victor Jr. All of this testing was done long before that was introduced. So I've never actually run one of those, although if you look at a Victor Junior and look at the runner length on it and compare that to some of the other stuff that we have run, we kind of know what's going to happen, certainly compared to a PI manifold. It would be interesting to see how much it adds at the top and where we have to run it to make a Victor Junior work. Because I know that a Victor Junior is not going to do what PI intake does, at least not down low. But if you've run one, let me know what it did, and especially if you've compared it to anything else. Roman wants to know, I want to turbo a 1972 Ford 302, as we all should want to. Will a stock oil pan work? Yes, it will. Just make sure that you drill the return high enough up to where it's above the oil level. Windage tray is not a bad idea, or at least a kind of sump for the oil there. Tim says he's putting together an L33. That's good, with a sloppy stage 2. Looking for 800 horsepower. That's an easy deal. Planning on daily driving it. What spark plug heat ranges? We normally run when we're running stuff on the engine dyno, especially if we're doing all of it. We're running a 9 or 10, but an 8 probably would work. I've even seen guys run 7s in them. Just bring the gap down, and a lot of that, the plug range is a lot like the ring gap. It depends on how long you have that heat in it for. And again, this is another test that I've never had anybody show me what happens. I've never seen anybody run different plug gaps and create detonation from a hotter plug that we can absolutely 100% attribute to the hotter plug design as compared to a colder plug design. I'd like to see that. I'm fairly confident that that's true. I just have never seen real back-to-back testing, like in a lab or something, where they could show me that. Rotax twin, didn't you say you down tested 140 degrees? Isn't that kind of cool for an aluminum head engine? No, it's not. We do it because it simulates. We like to say that we do it because it simulates what happens in a drag boat. But the reality is that it makes it much safer and gives us more of a tuning window and stuff. NG, weren't you coming out with cams? If so, will you also install? No, I don't do installs. I get a lot of questions about that. I get people that say, well, can you do my turbo kit for me? Can you do? And I'm like, no, I don't have a shop. I don't do any of that stuff. I don't do installs. And so you'll have to do your own cam swap. Uh-oh, this is crazy. What would you recommend for a timing curve on a Ford 4.6 valve with 14 pounds of boost on 94 octane? There's so many other variables. People think that just like with ring gap, that it's just boost and ring gap. Okay, how much ring gap can I get if I run 12 pounds of boost? Like there's some finite number that's absolutely correct. There's not, and the curve, your timing curve is going to be dependent on a lot of other things besides just boost. Is it intercooled? How efficient is it? Is it working very well? What's the temperature of the inlet air coming into the turbo before the intercooler? Because that's going to make a big difference. What is the chamber shape like? How long are you running it under that boost? What is the timing that you have is going to dictate EGTs, and then that's going to dictate detonation, and then that's going to dictate the time. I mean, there's lots and lots of stuff. So I wish I could give you a number or a series of numbers that would help you, but I don't want to say anything and then have you put it in and have you blow your motor up, and you can say, that Richard guy doesn't know what he's talking about. I'd rather have you just say that I don't know what I'm talking about, and then if you blow your own motor up, you can blow your own motor up. I can only tell you what we run when we do the stuff, and what we do under wide open throttle on the engine dyno in kind of an optimized condition is different than what I would run out on the street, certainly. Joyce wants to know if we can record horsepower in kilowatts. Well, we wouldn't record it in kilowatts. It should just be a conversion. I'll check and see on the software to see if it would convert it. If it would show it in kilowatts, I'll find out. I've never looked at that. That would be interesting. Jared Stallworth, yeah. Let's see. Considering a turbo on a 2006 Ford Explorer 463 valve, what would be a decent turbo? The little GT45 is always the good starter turbo because it's more than enough power for what you're talking about there. If you want to run 7 pounds, get your feet wet, it's a cheap turbo. If something happens to it, it's easy to replace. It's cheap. It's do that turbo, do an intercooler. You're going to need to tune it. You're going to have to put bigger injectors and a bigger fuel pump in it. And then you can even run it on a 3 valve. You'll make pretty decent power. You can run it with the stock cams and the stock springs and stuff on it, and it should do pretty well. Tim says lots of guys draw a hard line at 500 horsepower on 2 valve rods, and there are very few people making more. There might be something to it. I would disagree with the 500 number. We've made way more than that. As a matter of fact, I think no, that one was not. I know that we've made 700 with stock rods, and I don't know how many pulls that was. So maybe if you're driving around all the time, maybe that's a bad number. But I know that we've run lots and lots and lots of stuff at 600 or 650 with Kenny Bells on them and Vortex on them and that kind of stuff. So I don't know what that number is, and I don't know how long they last. I do want to do a big bang on a 2 valve. I think that would be interesting. I think that might surprise some people. Gene wants variable valve timing on 4.6.2 valve. Yes, after seeing what they do when we just adjust the cams, I would agree. Tim, what's up? Yeah, see, James, you said there was a guy locally that turbocharged a 3800 4th gen Camaro and it went 10s. See, that's actually the motor that I would like to end up in the Nova. I want to put the Atlas like 4200 in there because I think that would be cool. This car was originally a 6-cylinder, so that's kind of the ultimate GM 6-cylinder. I think that would be cool. But I really, really would like to have a turbocharged and supercharged 3800 V6 with maybe a Camaro 5-speed. I know it's a T5 and it's probably going to be a little iffy. But I really would like to have that combination in the Nova also. Jody's building an LY6 for the sloppy stage 2, dual valve springs with 400 pounds of seat pressure. That should be fine. Stock Trunnions. We run stock Trunnions a lot. Again, it's on the dyno and not out on the street. And the push rods, I don't know. We normally change the push rods. I know we go to a hardened push rod, especially when we go up in spring rate. But I've had a lot of people run them, and I've even seen some Spintron data that suggests that that maybe you shouldn't change the push rods. But we'll get into that discussion later on. More Power wants me to show a difference from losing a cylinder and its effect on power on the engine. I know, like pulling a plug wire. We can do that. It would be better to do that because he wants to basically pull a plug or basically disable one of the cylinders to see if it's actually 12% or so of a V8. We can do that on a fuel injected motor because I can tell you on a carbureted motor, it really plays havoc to the signal of the carburetor when you lose a hole. So the loss is more than one hole. Basically, it's more than the 12% number. But it would be interesting. That's kind of one of the things that we wanted to show. I talked to Freiberger about this and Brule about this. I wanted to show things like what happens when you burn a plug wire, when you hurt a spark plug, how much of a vacuum leak is bad. All of these like little things that happen to us that we have to chase and figure out. But how much of it is really like, how much power is it really worth? What does it really affect? So that's kind of good stuff. Roman going to ARP head bolts on a 302. Should have gone to head studs. Either one of those will work for the 302 because that's not the weak link. That's not going to stop you from, if you lift a head gasket or blow a head gasket, it's not going to be because you had head bolt or head stud. It's going to be because something else broke. It's not going to be the strength of the head gasket. It'll probably be a tune issue, I would imagine. Again, that's another thing. I haven't seen somebody show me what that cylinder pressure level is that where the head bolt stops working and the head stud starts working better. I'd like to see that. And maybe I should go visit the guys at ARP and talk to them a little bit about it. I think that would be interesting. Joffrey O'Brien wants me to do some stuff with a 3.8 liter SX, the V6 in the Mustang. I haven't done anything with those. I don't think, I take that back. I think we did some chassis dyno stuff. I think, my buddy Dave that used to run Tiny Avenger that did all the 2.3 liter 4-cylinder SVO turbo stuff and T-Bird stuff. I think he got a V6, Mustang. And I think we did some upgrades on it. Like we did headers and catback and maybe an air filter and a tune and stuff. So we may have done something. I have to go back and look and see. That would be the only one that I've ever done. Alien Earth wants to know what I think of the 8.1. I love that motor. I've been looking for them in wrecking yards. If I found one of those, I definitely would grab it so I can use it because it's one of the ones that I want to test. The Ozman's out. Tom wants to know what will be the weak link at an H22 at 500 horsepower. Is it all stock? If it's all stock, it's the same thing as everything else is. It's usually a rod or a piston. Let's see. Brandon wants to see how much horsepower you can get out of an NA 4.6 PI2 valve. Somebody was on here, whoever the king of the 2 valve stuff is, and I wish I remembered his name. I'm so terrible at that. I need to write it down because I wanted to talk to him more about it. But he had some all motor 2 valve stuff that was making like big boy power. So I haven't done any of that. I think the most I've ever made is not even 500. I think that was 490 or so with one of the dual plenum intake manifolds that I did in big cams. It was on a 5 liter 4.6 valve with ported heads. Jody wants more power from his 99 3.8 liter V6. Yes, a turbo works good. An M90 probably will not be enough. The turbo would be a better way to go. A 5.3 obviously is also a good way to go. Tim, GT84, is it hard to swap from non-PI to PI cylinder heads? No, it's not. It's just like a head swap. They work very well. And the cam I'd recommend is the 262, the smallest of the PI heads, the smallest of the cam that Comp offers for the PI head. Jake wants a good solution for a 544 valve intake manifold. The ones that we ran a Sullivan. We ran, if you can find the Boss stuff, those work really well. We ran a Navigator stuff and then adapters for the Navigator to other things, although the adapted ones didn't seem to work as well. They're actually kind of limited for the 5.4. See, Julius has a few Boss 260, 290 intakes. Oh, and a Carcraft dual quad. Nice. Fatty Lover 76, is there turbo lag with a rear mount turbo? Take a look at the rear mount turbo test that I just did conveniently. That video should be up. It's 2 or 3 back or whatever now from all the stuff that I posted. But we did do a rear mount turbo versus the standard position mounts, and then we did a single versus twin, all kinds of stuff. So there's a lot of good information up there for you. But yes, there is turbo lag from repositioning. Although we went to extremes, we went like 12 or 15 feet. It was a lot. It was more than we needed to go for, considering where most rear mounts are. Most rear mounts are actually more like mid mounts. Rufus wants to see a video of Edelbrock carb versus a Holley carb. I did, when I had the Cadillac, we did a Quadrajet versus a Holley carburetor, and the Holley made more, even though everybody swears that the Quadrajet is definitely the way to go. And honestly, if we test those and the air fuel is right and the carburetor is sized right, there's not a big difference in power between those two. One of them doesn't magically work better than the other. Like I said, if they're sized right and jetted right and they produce the same air fuel, usually there's not a big change in power. Patrick wants to know, locking out cam phasers on a mod motor, is it good or bad? It becomes, I'll tell you that it's bad if you have the stock cams in it. You should run, you should let the cams phase the way that they're supposed to if you have stock cams in it. If you put phaser limiters in it to limit the amount of swing, that's usually because of piston to valve clearance. So if you put bigger cams in it, all of a sudden you cannot advance and retard those cams the same amount because you have limited piston to valve clearance. So you have to bring that spread in. So then, and if you go to really big cams, then they just have to stay in one fixed position like most normal cams. So I'm not going to say that that's good or bad. It just becomes necessary when you go to bigger cams. Oh, Unity Motorsports Garage for the Stroker 4.6 mod motor. Is that you're saying that's the King Daddy for the 2-valve stuff? Who's giving me thumbs down? We're trying. You're killing me over here. We can't add friends in chat. I don't know why that would be. Let's see. The Green Scene made a rookie mistake and got stock head bolts on a Turbo Stroker 408. Am I guaranteed to lift the head without studs? Is this a 408 LS or 408 Ford? First of all, there would be a difference there. And you won't lift the head on either one of those. You would be less likely on the Ford because those head bolts are very good. They're less stretchy than the LS head bolts are, although we've run lots of boost on stock head bolts also, and lots of other guys have too. If you look at Matt over at Sloppy, he's done a ton of stuff. So I don't think you're screwed. And the other thing that we have done that you could think about doing is we've replaced the head bolts one at a time with studs, and kept the head gasket in there. So we just undo one bolt and replace it with a stud and then torque that stud down and then remove the next one. And we do that, and then there's no leakage of the head gasket or anything. Okay, if it's an LS, that's the same thing. That's like I was talking about. You can run boost. I wouldn't run a big bang motor like that, but I wouldn't be afraid to run, 7, 8, 10 pounds. And I think Matt's run even more than that. I just have never done it. So he might be the guy to ask about that, about how much you can get away with. Yeah, I agree, Tim. The stock ECU will definitely run PI head swap if he stays with the stock PI cams and stock PI intake manifold. He's going to have it tuned, but I don't think he'll peg the stock mass air meter if he stays with that stock stuff. More Power wants to know why he hasn't seen any old Predator carbs tested. I don't know that I've ever even seen one at Westech. And they're all OG there. They know what's going on. I've never seen anybody bring one in, and we certainly don't have one there. But if we had one, I would like to test it. Simple Mods, what do you think about Honda J Series? I love them. I love the J Series. I love the K Series. I love the B. I love the D, especially the D15Z in the Civic VX. Oh, I wanted to ask your guys' opinion on one other thing. I've been talking to somebody online about a draw-through turbo system. So I wanted to know, and Tim might know, I want to get, or I probably will have to get, I'd like to do, he's got a draw through system, and it's an Excel Turbosonic or something like that. So, and I hadn't seen one of those. I'm familiar with the Martin turbo systems. We've actually run those before, but this Turbosonic one, it has a Ray J turbo, and I think that it's running okay, but I'll want to do a turbo upgrade on it. So what I want to know is if I can take a standard turbo and put a carbon seal in it, if there are rebuild kits with a carbon seal that would last me long enough on the engine dyno to run that. So if anybody has any turbo experience, and then the other question is, I've never taken one apart to do a rebuild on it. If you do that and we line the impellers up at the same spot, will the balance stay the same enough to run these things? So if anybody has any information on that, let me know. Yeah, Patrick, I was just talking about draw through stuff. I do plan on doing one. Yes, a Mazda rotary would be awesome, Roland. See, I was reading your mind, Patrick. I knew that you were going to ask that question even before you asked it. More power back in the early 90s. There was a guy who ran a draw-through turbo on a 77 Pontiac Firebird. Yeah, you can make them work. I mean, it's not ideal because most guys don't run intercoolers on them because you don't want to have the fuel go through there. And usually the problems with a lot of those draw-through systems, they were designed back when V8s were making 150 horsepower. And so they offered a fairly good upgrade for those kinds of things. But they're not going to do well on a modern, even a 4.8 or a 5.3 that's already making 450 horsepower. So the turbos need to be upsized for a lot of these things. Some of these small Ray J's are only 400 or 450 horsepower turbos. So I want to be able to have a turbo that I can make this system work with that will actually provide boost for a modified motor. That means I'm going to have to use some sort of more modern turbo because I don't know that we'll find any Ray J draw through stuff with a carbon seal on. So I want to know if I can make my own with a carbon seal. Roman wants to know the benefits of a draw-through system. The reason the guys were doing draw-through systems, at least back in the day, is because you didn't have to have a dedicated blow-through carburetor. Now, a blow-through setup works better, especially now that we have blow-through carburetors. But on a draw-through setup, you just have a standard carburetor. All you have to do is jet it correctly, and it will work. It draws the fuel through. And so it idles nice and it does all that stuff. And you don't have to worry about making a dedicated blow through carburetor, which guys back then, all that was like voodoo magic back then. So that's why guys did it. It was easy to hook up and easy to make work. Pontiac obviously did that on the 301. Buick did it on their 231 engines on the V6s. So there were a few of them that guys did even from the factory, and they worked fairly well. Yeah, they might. Tim says that the eBay GT45s might not be balanced at all to begin with. They may not be. But are there carbon seal kits for them? Okay, Jewish, for some reason this is hidden. Your email address is hidden. We're going to go ahead and show everybody. Wait a minute. Why did I? Let's see. I don't know what's going on here, Joyce. No, I don't want to do any of that. I just want to show your thing. Justin says he'll mail a Predator carburetor if we want to test one against other carbs. Is it working? Is it? I mean, how old is it? This guy, it's got to be like old school, right? Sinister Silverado had a Yamaha 650 turbo. Nice. I like those. I like the GPZ 750 turbos too. And Honda also had a 500 turbo way back in the day also. Roman wants to know, is the 351 Cleveland a small block? In my mind, it is, because for the same reason that a 351 Windsor is. Now, A 351M, in my opinion, is not. It's in that no man's land between small block and big block. But that's just me. Yeah, Mike, Corky said Corky did get draw throughs to work. Gail Banks did a lot of draw through stuff on big block marine applications, which is why I contacted him and I thought that for sure, like 15 or 20 of those old Ray J turbos just sitting around collecting dust. Excuse me. Is there a difference in bottom end strength between a 4.6.3 valve and a 5.4.3 valve? I don't know. I don't know that they would be any different. I think that the rod length's going to be different, right? Because of the I don't know. If the rod length is different, you might inherently have, because of the length of the rod, unless they strengthened it up accordingly, you might have a weaker rod because it's longer. I don't know what they did. You'd have to look at an FEA analysis of those two to see. I don't think that, I don't know. I'm just trying to figure all that out in my head. In the same way that a 4.8 rod should theoretically be weaker than a 5.3 or a 6.0 rod because it's longer. So unless they did something to it, beefed up the beam or something to make it stronger, to make it the equivalent strength of the other shorter rods, you would think that the longer one would be not as strong. Yeah, I know. And somebody brought up the fact that they're both powdered metal and centered. I know that the metallurgy is the same and the process is the same. I just don't know if that length change is different. And Tim, I think that they are. I think that they are the crack cap stuff. A 4.8 has shorter stroke and has less side thrust on the pistons. Yeah, Plum Piper. That's a good point, and that's what I was just reading about that today, and remember it from back in the day that the draw through turbo systems were all the rage on the VW powered like sand rails. Everybody did a draw through setup on those 4 cylinders, and they usually would do it. A lot of guys would do it with side draft carburetors, which work very well. And if you have the carburetor positioned up high enough, you don't have fuel puddling, which can happen with the draw through setup, which is one of the problems with it. Some guys would run a Holly and an elbow, which is what I want to do because I think that's awesome. And for what we're doing on an engine dyno, that's not a big deal. Roman said he ran out on a forum that a guy ran a 351 crank and a 302 block. I don't think that the mains are the same size. Fascist pendant, can you intercool a draw through turbo? As I was explaining, that's problematic because you'll have the fuel going through the intercooler and the fuel will come out of the suspension and then puddle on the turbo side of the intercooler, so it'd be problematic. The one nice thing that I can say about the draw through setup is you are going to have charge cooling. So I would hope that it would, that's part of the reason why I want to run it is because I want to measure the charge temperature on a draw through setup to see if we have how much intercooling we have from the draw through setup. Because we know that when we blow through a carburetor on the other side of the carburetor, now obviously we're measuring some of the liquid, which is problematic when we're trying to get the measurement. It might be better to measure it down at the port, but on the draw through setup, I can measure it, like right after the turbo, and then all the way in the intake manifold, and find out if there is a drop in temperature or if it stays consistent all the way through. It's traveling pretty fast, so it would be interesting to see what happens. And that's kind of why I want to do the testing. Plus, it's a draw through turbo. When was the last time I ran one of those? Like almost never. Admiral says, I did his video idea. I have some water meth money. Can we see the weakest LS that you've big banged done again after a cryo treatment by 300 below? Send the short block assembled, then retorque. So I don't know what you're saying. Do I need to send you a motor to have it cryoed or something? Maybe I'm misunderstanding it. You think that the cryo treatment is going to help with the strength of the bottom end? Go for broke off road. Didn't the Trans Am from 76 to 81? They had a turbo 301, so that's more like a 5-liter, but it was a 301. It was turbo setup. So here's the problem, Admiral Peck. To test the effectiveness of a cryo setup, if you're saying that will increase the strength of the bottom end parts, like the crank, I'm not worried about. We're not going to break the crank, but the rods and the pistons, if we cryo them and run them, the problem is you don't know what the strength of it is of the ones that we sent. We would only be assuming that they're the same if we tested another set and broke them. The problem is we don't know why we broke them. I don't think it was a tune issue, judging by the tune we have in there. We also don't know how much strength they had left in them when we get them from the wrecking yard. Was it a well taken care of one? And even if you go before that, was it a good batch? Was it a bad batch when it was originally put together? There's a lot of questionable things in here for me to say definitively that will do that. I'd rather just see test data, if you have test data, that shows a metallurgical change or somehow a strength change that we can actually attribute to that, because I cannot attribute that if I run it and it makes 1,400 horsepower instead of 1,350 or whatever the number is. I can't attribute that to this because I don't know if I would have done that same thing and it would have made that same power without me doing that change. And that's just me doing devil's advocate for the scientific process. And that's the way that I approach every test, no matter what it is. I don't care what it is. I always ask, like, okay, but what if we just did that anyway without making the change? What would have happened? And that's always kind of a problem. That's why, I spend all this time second guessing myself when I do these tests anyways. Yeah. See, Go for Broke is talking about everybody arguing about slower surface speeds for bearing sizes and main bearing sizes. And I hear this stuff all the time, except again, nobody has ever showed me at what point that actually makes a difference. Like, had a definitive answer with data to support that answer, not just an opinion. And that's the problem with testing. It's just so hard to get like a real answer because the amount of testing and the amount of effort and energy and money that you'd have to spend to actually answer that question is a lot. That's why I do the easy stuff. Hey, look, these two intake manifolds, this did this and this did that. $25.95. What is a good CJP? What is a good supercharger kit for heads, cam, intake, Fox body? Don't want to go to a turbo. Already have a turbo car. Only need 450 to 500 horsepower. The Torque Storm is good. The Vortech, the Paxton, the Pro Charger, those are good. This is one of the instances where I wouldn't recommend a Kenny Bell, only because they don't have an intercooler on it, and I think that you should have an intercooler on it. So any of those centrifugals, I ran mine for years and years and years. it doesn't feel like a turbo car does, as I had explained in one of my videos about the first time I drove a turbo car compared to my Vortech supercharged Mustang, which I thought was the fastest thing in the world. And then after you drive a turbo car, you're like, oh yeah, it has like an extra 200 foot-pounds of torque here in the 4,000 RPM range, and that's what makes it feel like a big block. So that's kind of a different thing. But any of those centrifugal blowers will work good. Yeah, Tim mentioned that the guys at Engine Masters were looking for a little bit of extra horsepower, so they're talking about bearing sizes and bearing speed and stuff. And a lot of guys will do also, they'll do narrower bearings. They'll do Honda bearings in the small block Chevy journals and stuff. And you're trying to reduce the amount of contact that you have, so you're reducing the amount of friction that you have, so you're gaining power essentially. And when you're going at that level, which I found out when I was testing, you have to find each one at a time. And I went through that same thing when I was running US touring car with the Del Sol, with the Honda Del Sol, given the limited amount of modifications that were allowed in the series, and it's that way in any series that you race in, given the limitations, you have to like kick and scratch and fight for every last horsepower. And that's what he's talking about. So when you're talking about bearing speeds and stuff, you have to look into that stuff. You have to look into the oil drain. You have to look into all of this stuff. If you guys, I'm going to be running I think I have a photo of it. The guys are here, probably most of you. I'm going to be running this supercharger, and I'm sorry that I have already forgotten the name and the company that had sent this to me. I need to write this stuff. It's like a Cadillac supercharger or something. It has an integrated intercooler and stuff, and then now they've made the adapters, and you can actually see the adapters. Let's see over here, and you can see those over there. So we're able to run that supercharger on an LS, which would be cool. I'm going to run it on the little 4.8. So we'll have some interesting comparisons between the blower and a turbo, and we'll run other things, run different maybe pulleys or different air inlets or whatever, all kinds of cool stuff, because, when you have boost, good things happen. Molina, what do you think? And I have 2 more minutes at 107. I'm actually going to go to 110. Let's see. What do I think about the difference between a Victor Jr. intake and a bullet intake for the 4.6? I haven't tested the Victor Jr. intake, so somebody else might be able to answer that better than me. The bullet intake didn't do what I thought it was going to do. Both the bullet and even more so the trick flow manifold are designed for higher RPM. The Victor Jr. is definitely going to be designed for higher RPM. I would suspect that the bullet and the TFS manifold will make more average power than the Victor Jr., but I can't guarantee that until actually that I test it. Nobody wants Julius to leave. Do I have a favorite engine temperature we like to test at? I like to test as cold as possible, like I said, because it just gives you more wiggle room when you're doing the tuning. And that, for me, that's more important when we're first starting the loads and stuff and braking after the break-in. But when we're first starting the load and first doing our roll-ins, that's when I like having it be colder. After that, I don't care. Then we can run it at whatever temperature. I'm more concerned with that the temperature is the same at the starting point of each run. So we want the oil temperature and the water temperature to be the same. I'm more concerned with that because it's all relative. I'm not comparing these runs to what guys are doing on the street. That's a different thing. But I do know that, relatively speaking, if you get this kind of gain from headers, if the motor was cold both times, it just means that the two numbers were both elevated, but it's still going to be relatively the same gain. You guys have a good night, Pat. And I have 45 seconds left. We started a little bit late. Okay, guys. Time to call it a night. What's up? Make sure to go watch the video, and the part 2 is going up tomorrow, and I think part 2 is going to go up a little earlier because I'm working on the editing tonight, so you'll see how those other intakes did, and then I've got a whole list of other stuff to work on. So thanks for showing up, guys. We will see you all tomorrow.